The late afternoon sun in Pennsylvania has a quality you don't find anywhere else. It's thick, almost golden, and it filters through the oak leaves in a way that makes the whole world feel soft and quiet. That's where I was, on my knees in the garden, my hands deep in the dark, rich soil that Eleanor had cultivated for 40 years. My knuckles, swollen from a lifetime of working with stone, barely felt the thorns on the rose bushes she'd planted. Even 3 years after she was gone, this garden was more her than it was dirt and leaves. It was my job to keep it that way. The scent of damp earth and blooming peonies was the closest I could get to having her next to me, her laughter echoing in the rustle of the wind. My life had settled into this rhythm. The garden, the workshop, the quiet house filled with memories etched into the very stone hearth I built with my own 2 hands. It was a peaceful life. A lonely one, but peaceful. The shrill ring of the phone from the kitchen was a violation of that peace. I almost never got calls anymore, aside from the occasional check-in from my sister down in Florida. I wiped my hands on my jeans, my knees cracking as I stood, and walked inside. I glanced at the caller ID, and my heart gave a painful lurch. Ethan, 4 years. 4 years of silence, of birthdays and holidays, marked only by a hollow space where his voice should have been. 4 years since that last, terrible argument that had left a crater in our lives. I stared at the name, my thumb hovering over the green button. Every part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, to retreat back to the predictable quiet of my garden. But then I saw Eleanor's picture on the mantelpiece, her eyes smiling, and I could almost hear her voice, gentle but firm. "He's still your boy, Frank. Don't let your pride be the last thing you hold on to." I took a deep breath and answered, "Hello? Dad? It's Ethan." His voice was different. The boyish impatience I remembered was gone, replaced by a smooth, polished confidence that sounded foreign to me. It was the voice of a man I didn't know. "I know who it is," I said, my own voice rougher than I intended. An awkward silence stretched between Pennsylvania and wherever he was now. "Seattle?" I think my sister had said. "Look, Dad, I know it's been a long time, and most of that is on me. I was angry. I was stupid. I waited, leaning against the kitchen counter that my father and I had installed when I was just a teenager. This whole house was a testament to generations of tangible work, of calloused hands creating something real and lasting. That was the core of our last fight. He'd wanted my life savings, the $50,000 Eleanor and I had painstakingly put away, to invest in his new app. Some complicated thing with cryptocurrency that I didn't understand. It wasn't just the risk, it was the principle. Money for nothing, I'd called it. You want to build something, you pick up a hammer and a trowel, not a laptop. The words had been cruel. I knew that even then. I'd seen the fire in his eyes when he stormed out, shouting that I'd never believed in him, that I was stuck in the past. Maybe he was right. The silence that followed felt like my punishment. "I've done well for myself, Dad," he continued, pulling me from the memory. "The app. It worked. It really worked. Sarah and we have a new place just outside the city. It's beautiful." Sarah, his wife. I'd seen pictures of her on social media once. Blonde, elegant, with a smile that looked like it was designed by a committee. "We want you to come visit. I want you to see it. I want to make things right." The words were a balm on a wound I didn't even realize was still open. Make things right. It was all I'd wanted to hear for 4 years. My own stubborn pride had kept me from picking up the phone, and here he was, offering an olive branch. A first-class plane ticket, a guest suite with a view of the mountains. He laid it all out, his polished voice describing a world of wealth and success I could barely imagine, a world he'd built without me. Eleanor's voice was in my ear again, a hopeful whisper. "Go, Frank, it's time." "When were you thinking?" I asked, my resolve crumbling like old mortar. "Next week? I'll handle everything. Just say yes, Dad, please." And against every cynical, stone-hard instinct that had protected my heart for the last 4 years, I heard myself say the word that would change everything. "Okay, son, I'll be there." Hanging up the phone felt like closing a book I hadn't realized I was still reading. The silence of the house rushed back in, but this time it was different. It wasn't the peaceful, settled silence of my routine. It was a humming, anxious silence, buzzing with the possibilities of the future and the ghosts of the past. For the first time in years, the future was an unknown territory. I walked over to the mantelpiece and looked at Eleanor's photograph. "Well, Ellie," I murmured, tracing the frame I'd carved for her from a piece of fallen cherry wood. "I'm going. Hope you're happy." Her smile in the picture seemed to widen just a little. She had always been the bridge between me and Ethan, the one who could smooth over my hard edges and soothe his restless ambition. Without her, we'd just been two islands of stubborn pride. Packing was a foreign ritual. I had to climb the attic stairs, the wood groaning under my weight, to find the old Samsonite suitcase we'd used for our trip to the Grand Canyon for our 25th anniversary. It was covered in a thick layer of dust, a relic from another lifetime. Inside, it still smelled faintly of her perfume and the dry Arizona air. As I packed my simple clothes, flannel shirts, sturdy jeans, work boots I probably wouldn't even need, I felt a growing sense of inadequacy. What does a stonemason wear to a millionaire's mansion? The thought was so absurd I almost laughed. It felt like I was preparing to visit a foreign country, one where I didn't speak the language or understand the customs. At the back of my closet, tucked away on the top shelf, was a small box. It was made of walnut, its surface sanded so smooth it felt like silk beneath my calloused fingertips. I'd made it for Ethan on his 10th birthday, carving his initials into the lid with a looping, intricate script. He'd kept his treasures in it: a hawk's feather, a handful of shiny river stones, a silver dollar our neighbor had given him. It was a piece of me, of my craft, of the love I knew how to show with my hands. On impulse, I lifted it down. I didn't know if he still had the things he once treasured, but I decided then and there that I would bring him the box. It was a reminder of a time before the world got complicated, before money and ambition had carved a canyon between us. Holding it, my mind drifted back to the day I gave it to him. It was a warm summer afternoon, and we were down at the creek that snaked through the woods behind our house. The sunlight dappled through the canopy of leaves, dancing on the surface of the water. I was teaching him how to skip stones, a skill passed down from my own father. His small hand struggled to find the right grip on the flat, smooth slate. "You have to get low, buddy," I'd said, crouching down beside him. "Like a coiled spring, it's all in the wrist." His face was a mask of concentration, his tongue sticking out from the corner of his mouth. He'd thrown a few that sank with a sad plunk. But then he found a perfect stone, a dark gray disk that felt just right in his palm. He drew his arm back, spun, and let it fly. It kissed the water once, twice, 3, 4 times before finally sinking into the gentle current. His gasp of pure joy was a sound I would have bottled up and saved forever if I could. "I did it, Dad, did you see?" he'd yelled, turning to me with eyes shining with pride. "I saw, Ethan. That was perfect." Later that day I gave him the box, telling him it was for important things, like the stones he'd find on his adventures. He had looked at the box with the same reverence he'd held for that perfect stone. It felt good to see him value something made, not bought. I gently wrapped the walnut box in an old t-shirt and placed it in the suitcase, a tangible piece of hope nestled between my checkered shirts. I was still just Frank Miller, a man who understood stone and wood better than he understood his own son. But I was going to try. For Eleanor, and for the boy who once found magic in a skipping stone. The engine of my old Ford F-150 turned over with a familiar, reassuring rumble. It was a sound I knew as well as my own heartbeat. That truck had been my partner for 20 years, hauling tons of flagstone, slate, and granite. Its dents and scratches were a roadmap of my life's work, a testament to 1,000 jobs well done. As I pulled out of my gravel driveway and onto the quiet country road, the rising sun cast long shadows from the ancient oaks that lined the property. In the rearview mirror, my small stone house, the one I'd been born in, grew smaller and smaller until it was just a gray speck against the green hills of Pennsylvania. I felt a pang of loneliness, a sudden urge to turn back to the safety of my routine. But the road ahead was pulling me forward, a straight gray line leading to a sun I barely knew anymore. The first day was spent crossing familiar territory. The rolling hills of Appalachia felt like an extension of my own backyard, the landscape dotted with old barns and stone fences that I could appreciate with a craftsman's eye. But as Pennsylvania bled into Ohio, and Ohio into the flat, endless plains of Indiana and Illinois, the world began to change. The sky grew bigger, wider, a vast canvas of blue that made my truck feel like a tiny, insignificant speck. The land was all agriculture here, geometric fields of corn and soybeans stretching to the horizon. A different kind of work than the one I knew, but work I could still respect. I'd stop at truck stops that all smelled the same of diesel, fried food, and stale coffee and exchange nods with men whose faces were lined with the same kind of weariness and quiet pride I saw in my own mirror. I was still in a world I understood. It was on the third day, somewhere in the Badlands of South Dakota, that the feeling of being an outsider truly began to creep in. The landscape became alien, beautiful but harsh, its jagged formations carved by wind and time. The cars on the interstate started to change too. Fewer battered pickups, more gleaming Teslas and Audis humming past me with an unnerving silence. Their drivers were younger, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of their dashboards. They were citizens of a new world, one that ran on code and electricity, not sweat and stone. I felt like a relic from a bygone era, my V8 engine a loud, gas-guzzling dinosaur in their clean, efficient future. I thought about Ethan's app, this intangible thing that had made him a millionaire. How could something you couldn't hold in your hand, something that didn't even really exist in the physical world, be worth so much? It was a mystery to me, a language I couldn't speak. My value was measured in straight lines, level surfaces, and walls that would stand for 100 years. His was measured in clicks and algorithms. The final stretch of the journey was the most daunting. Crossing the Rocky Mountains was like passing through a great, formidable gate. Then came the Cascade Mountains of Washington, and the world outside my windshield grew dark and imposing. The trees here were different towering pines and firs that crowded the highway, their sheer scale making the Pennsylvania oaks of my home seem like garden shrubs. They blotted out the sun, casting the road in a perpetual twilight. This was Ethan's world now. As I descended from the mountain passes, the signs for Seattle began to appear, pointing toward a city I'd only ever seen in movies. The air grew damp, carrying the scent of pine and rain. My old truck, caked with the dust of 5 states, felt grimy and out of place as I merged onto the pristine, multi-lane highways, surrounded by a silent army of electric vehicles. I was entering the heart of my son's new kingdom, and I had never felt more like a stranger. The GPS directed me off the main highway and onto a winding road that climbed deeper into the forested hills. The trees were so dense that sunlight struggled to pierce the canopy, painting the asphalt in shifting patterns of light and shadow. After a few miles, a formidable gate of black steel and dark wood blocked the way. A sign, carved into a massive slab of granite in a font that tried too hard to look rustic, read, "The Summit at Cedar Ridge." There was no guard, only an imposing keypad and a sleek black camera that swiveled to focus on my truck. It felt less like a neighborhood and more like the entrance to a fortress. My son had texted me a code. I punched in the numbers, and the heavy gate swung inward with a silent, menacing grace. The world inside was unnervingly perfect. The road was a ribbon of flawless blacktop, flanked by identical manicured lawns that looked more like green carpet than actual grass. The houses, set far back from the road, were monuments of glass, steel, and concrete, each trying to outdo the next in its aggressive modernism. There were no kids playing, no neighbors chatting over a fence, no signs of life at all beyond the occasional whisper of a luxury electric vehicle gliding past. The silence was absolute. The familiar throaty rumble of my F-150 felt like a profane shout in a library. I felt the unseen eyes of 100 security cameras, tracking my dusty, blue-collar intrusion into their sterile paradise. Ethan's house was at the very end of a cul-de-sac, perched on a cliffside with a dramatic view of the valley below. It wasn't a house so much as an architectural statement. It was a collection of intersecting glass boxes, its sharp angles and cold materials, a stark, almost violent contrast to the wild, organic beauty of the surrounding evergreen forest. It looked like a shard of ice that had fallen from the sky and embedded itself in the mountainside. I pulled my truck into the driveway, the crunch of my tires on the black gravel, the only sound. My dusty Ford looked like a stray dog that had wandered into a palace, parked next to a charging station for a car that probably cost more than my entire home. I cut the engine, and the silence that rushed in was even more profound. I sat there for a long moment just staring. Was this what success looked like? This cold, transparent cage? I grabbed the wrapped wooden box from the passenger seat and walked to the front door, a massive, pivoting panel of frosted glass. I pressed a single, glowing button on the wall, and a series of soft, melodic chimes echoed from deep within the house. I could see through the glass walls into a cavernous living room, furnished with sleek, low-profile furniture that looked deeply uncomfortable. Everything was in shades of gray, black, and white. There was no clutter, no warmth, no sign that people actually lived there. I waited. A minute passed, then two. I pressed the button again, holding it longer this time. The same polite chimes answered, but no footsteps followed. "Ethan?" I called out, my voice sounding small and thin in the vast quiet. "Sarah? It's Frank." Only the whisper of the wind through the tall firs replied. I checked my phone. I was right on time. I walked the perimeter of the house, feeling exposed and foolish under the unblinking gaze of the security cameras. The back of the house was an even larger wall of glass, looking out over a pristine infinity pool whose surface was as still and perfect as a mirror. The place was a fortress and a fishbowl all at once. He could be running late. LA traffic, he'd called it on the phone, a world away. Seattle must have its own version, I reasoned. I tried calling his cell, but it went straight to a crisp, professional voicemail. "You've reached Ethan Miller. Leave a message." There was no warmth, no personality. It sounded like he was selling something. I left a clipped message and sat down on the cold, poured concrete steps. The gift, the walnut box I had so carefully brought across the country, felt heavy and ridiculous in my hands. I was a man of stone, of solid, earthy things, sitting at the entrance to a hollow house of glass, waiting for a son who wasn't there. A profound sense of unease began to settle deep in my bones. Something felt wrong, terribly wrong. The sun began to dip below the jagged peaks of the mountains, and the shadows of the tall fir trees stretched across the driveway like long, dark fingers. I checked my watch. An hour. I'd been sitting here for a full hour, a lonely sentinel at the gates of my son's glass kingdom. The initial unease had started to curdle into a familiar, bitter disappointment. It felt like the fight all over again, me, waiting for him, and him off in a world that had no room for me. I was just about to stand up, to leave the foolish gift on the step, and begin the long, lonely drive back to a life I understood, when a voice cut through the silence. "That's a beautiful old truck you've got there." The voice was calm and feminine. I turned to see a woman standing at the edge of the driveway, near a meticulously landscaped garden that stood in warm, colorful contrast to the sterile green lawn of Ethan's property. She was in her late 60s, like me, with kind, intelligent eyes and silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. She held a pair of gardening shears in one hand. "She's seen better days, but she still runs true," I said, my voice hoarse. "Frank Miller." I stood up and offered a hand, which she took with a surprisingly firm grip. "Carol Jenkins. I live next door." She gestured with her head toward a much more modest, yet still beautiful, home built with warm cedar and riverstone. It was a house that looked like it had been designed by a human being. "I couldn't help but notice you waiting. You must be Ethan's father. He mentioned you were coming for a visit." "That's me, just taking in the architecture," I said, unable to keep a slight edge from my voice. Carol's smile faded slightly, and her eyes flicked toward the glass house, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. "He and Serafina can be unpredictable with their time. He's very driven." The way she said it didn't sound like a compliment. She took a step closer, lowering her voice, even though there was no one around for 100 yards. "Listen, Mr. Miller. Frank, I don't want to overstep my bounds, but I saw your truck, and I've been wrestling with myself ever since." A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't a friendly neighborhood welcome. "Is everything all right?" I asked. Her gaze was direct and serious, and I recognized the look instantly. It was the same look the doctor had given me right before he told me Eleanor's cancer wasn't responding to the treatment. It was the look of someone about to deliver terrible news. "I was an ER nurse for 40 years, she began, her voice steady and professional. "At Harborview, downtown. You learn to see things, patterns, things that don't add up." She paused, taking a deep breath. "Serafina's mother, Penelope, came to visit about 4 months ago. A lovely woman, full of life, a bit of a talker. She was staying for a week. I spoke to her the day she arrived, right over that hedge there. She was perfectly healthy, worried about her cholesterol, but who isn't at our age? She had a clean bill of health from her doctor back in Connecticut." The knot in my stomach tightened. I could see where this was going, but my mind refused to accept it. "The next evening," Carol continued, her eyes locked on mine, An ambulance came, screaming up the hill. I came out to see what was going on. Ethan was in the driveway, looking frantic. He told me his mother-in-law had collapsed right after dinner. A sudden, massive heart attack, he said. My God, I whispered. That's awful. Yes, Carol said, her voice dropping even lower. It was. But here's the thing, Frank. They said she was gone before the paramedics even got here. It was too fast. Too neat. Later, I heard Sarah telling another neighbor how tragic it was, that her mother had a secret, severe heart condition. That story contradicted everything Penelope had told me just the day before, and when you've seen 1,000 heart attacks, you know the rhythm of them. You know the signs, the chaos, the fight. This felt different. It was quiet, tidy, like a problem being solved. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The melodic chimes of the doorbell, the silent cameras, the empty, sterile house, it all took on a sinister new meaning. My son, my daughter-in-law. Murder? It was impossible. It was the stuff of television shows, not real life, not my life. You must be mistaken, I stammered, the words feeling weak and hollow. It's a tragedy, but people get sick. It happens. I hope I am mistaken, she said, her voice filled with a sincere, painful gravity. I've told myself that every day for 4 months, but my gut and 40 years of medical training tells me otherwise. I just knew I couldn't live with myself if I saw you walk into that house and didn't say something. Be careful, Frank. Please, just be careful what you eat and drink. Before I could form another coherent thought, she gave my arm a final, firm squeeze and retreated back to her property, leaving me standing alone in the deepening twilight. The gift-wrapped box in my hand now felt as heavy as a tombstone. In the distance, I heard the faint, electric hum of an approaching car. They were coming home, and I was trapped. The electric hum grew louder, and a vehicle that looked more like a spaceship than a car glided into the driveway. It was a low-slung, impossibly sleek machine in a shade of metallic gray that seemed to absorb the twilight, making it look like a phantom. The car whispered to a stop just a few feet from my truck, and the contrast was almost comical. My Ford was a sturdy, reliable workhorse, its character etched into its dense and faded paint. This thing was a silent, sterile weapon. For a terrifying moment, I was paralyzed. My legs felt like they were cast in concrete. Run! A primal part of my brain screamed. Get in your truck and drive away and never look back. But where would I go? What would I say? That a neighbor I'd just met told me a crazy story? They would call me a confused old man. They would make me the problem. The driver's side door opened upwards, like a wing, and my son emerged. I barely recognized him. The boy I remembered was scrappy and restless. This man was polished, his dark hair perfectly styled, his clothes a simple dark sweater, and slacks exuding a kind of casual expense I couldn't begin to comprehend. He saw me, and his face broke into a wide, brilliant smile. It was the smile of a stranger. Dad, oh my God, I am so sorry we're late, he said, his voice booming with practiced warmth as he strode toward me. A conference call ran long, and the traffic back from the city was just a total nightmare. You haven't been waiting long, have you? Every word felt like a line from a script. Carol's warning echoed in my ears. Too fast, too neat, like a problem being solved. I forced my own face into the shape of a smile, a painful stretching of muscles that felt stiff from disuse. Just got here, son. No trouble at all. He pulled me into a hug. It was a firm, confident embrace, but it had no warmth. It felt like being held by a statue. His expensive cologne was cloying, a chemical scent that had nothing to do with the fresh pine air around us. I patted his back, my hand trembling slightly. You look good, Ethan, I managed to say. You too, Dad. You haven't changed a bit. He pulled back, his eyes scanning my worn flannel shirt and dusty jeans. I couldn't tell if it was nostalgia or judgment in his gaze. The passenger door opened, and Serafina unfolded herself from the car. She was even more striking than her pictures. Tall, slender, with blonde hair pulled into a severe, elegant knot at the nape of her neck. Her face was a perfect, symmetrical mask of beauty. She moved toward me with the fluid grace of a dancer. Frank, she said, her voice smooth as silk. She took both of my hands in hers. Her skin was cool to the touch. It is such a genuine pleasure to finally meet you. I feel like I know you already. Ethan has told me so many wonderful stories. Her eyes, a pale, piercing blue, met mine. They were stunning and utterly empty. I saw no pleasure in them. I saw assessment. I saw a brilliant, calculating mind sizing me up, identifying my weaknesses, gauging my utility. It's good to meet you too, Sarah, I lied, my heart hammering against my ribs. Oh, what's this? She asked, her gaze falling to the walnut box still clutched in my hand. Just a little something, I said, my voice unsteady. I held it out to Ethan. I made this for you, for your 10th birthday. I don't know if you remember. I thought. My voice trailed off. Ethan took the box, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his face. For a single fleeting second, the polished mask of the tech millionaire fell away, and I saw the boy I knew. He ran his thumb over his carved initials. Wow, I remember this. I kept my lucky arrowhead in here. He looked at me, and his eyes seemed to soften with a real memory. Thank you, Dad. This is... How wonderfully quaint, Sarah cut in, her voice light and breezy, yet it sliced through the moment like a shard of glass. She placed a hand on Ethan's arm, her perfectly manicured nails a stark red against his dark sweater. You can find a special place for it inside. But first, let's get your father settled. You must be exhausted after that drive, Frank. Let us take your bags. And just like that, the moment was gone. The boy was gone, and the stranger was back, his expression resetting to one of polite hospitality. They flanked me, each taking an arm, their grips feeling less like support and more like the grip of guards escorting a prisoner. They led me toward the giant glass door. I was crossing the threshold, stepping out of the real world and into theirs, my mind screaming with a single terrifying thought. I was walking into the house where a woman had died. The heavy glass door swung shut behind us with a soft hydraulic hiss, sealing off the sounds of the outside world. The silence inside the house was even more profound than it had been outside. It was a dead, sterile silence, broken only by the faint ambient hum of some unseen technology. The air was cool and still, scrubbed clean of any scent of life, no smell of cooking, no trace of perfume, nothing. It was like stepping into a mausoleum. So, what do you think? Ethan asked, sweeping his arm out in a grand gesture. Pretty amazing, right? We were standing in a cavernous great room. The ceiling soared 2 stories high, and one entire wall was a sheet of glass that looked out into the blackness of the forest and the twinkling lights of some distant town in the valley below. The floor was polished concrete, and the furniture was sparse and geometric. A long, low sofa in a severe shade of charcoal. A single, black leather chair that looked more like a piece of sculpture than something you'd actually sit in, and a glass coffee table holding nothing but a single, artfully placed book. There were no photographs on the walls, no stacks of magazines, no half-finished coffee cups, none of the comfortable clutter that makes a house a home. It's big, I said, the word wholly inadequate. My own home, with its low ceilings and cozy rooms, could have fit into this one space 4 times over. The architect is world-renowned, Sarah said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast room. She specializes in what's called environmental minimalism. The idea is to erase the barrier between the interior and the exterior. I looked at the giant wall of glass, at the oppressive darkness of the forest pressing in. It didn't feel like the barrier was erased. It felt like we were in a well-lit display case, on show for whatever was lurking in the woods. My eyes were drawn to a large, abstract painting on the far wall. It was a chaotic slash of angry red and black paint. It didn't look like art to me. It looked like a wound. That's a cross, Ethan said proudly, noticing my gaze. It's a fantastic investment. It's already appreciated 30% since we bought it. He and Sarah proceeded to give me the grand tour, their voices a duet of brand names and technical specifications. Ethan would point out the smart home features, showing me how he could change the lighting, the temperature, and the music from his phone. Sarah would name-drop the Italian designers of the furniture and the German manufacturers of the kitchen appliances. The kitchen was a masterpiece of stainless steel and white quartz, and gleaming laboratory that showed no evidence of ever having been used to cook a meal. The knives were arranged in a magnetic block like surgical tools, the spice rack filled with exotic, unopened jars. With every room they showed me, the profound sadness I felt for my son deepened. He wasn't showing me his home. He was giving me a sales pitch. He was trying to prove to me that he'd made it, that his intangible, digital world had produced these tangible, expensive results. He was seeking the approval he'd never felt he'd gotten from me, but he was trying to earn it with things, not character. I thought of my own house. I thought of the worn spot on the arm of my favorite chair where my hand always rests. I thought of the pencil marks on the pantry door frame, charting Ethan's growth from a small boy into a man who now felt like a stranger. I thought of the faint scent of Eleanor's rosewater lotion that still clung to the curtains in our bedroom. Those were the things that made a home. This place had no memories. It had no soul. It was a hollow kingdom, and as I looked at the strained, desperate pride on my son's face, I realized he was its hollow king. "It's very clean," I said, as we completed the circle and ended up back in the great room. It was the only honest compliment I could think of. "We have a service," Sarah said dismissively. "Now you must be parched. I'll get us all something to drink. What can I get for you, Frank?" Her pale blue eyes locked on mine, and her perfect hostess smile was back in place. Carol's warning screamed in my mind. "Be careful what you eat and drink." "Just a glass of water would be fine," I said, my throat suddenly as dry as dust. "If you don't mind, I'll get it myself. I don't want to be a bother." Sarah's perfect smile tightened for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of annoyance at my refusal of her hospitality. It was the flicker of a predator whose prey had unexpectedly sidestepped the snare. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a mask of gracious understanding. "Of course, Frank. Help yourself. The glasses are in the cabinet to the right of the sink. Let us know if you need anything at all." Ethan had already sunk into the severe leather chair, scrolling through his phone, having already disengaged now that the performance of the tour was over. He was a passenger in his own life, and Sarah was the one at the wheel. I gave them both a tight nod and walked toward the kitchen, my boots echoing unnervingly on the polished concrete floor. Each step felt deliberate, heavy. I was moving away from the immediate threat, but deeper into the belly of the beast. The kitchen, up close, was even more intimidating. It was a cathedral of cold, hard surfaces. The massive quartz island was a flawless white slab, completely empty except for a single perfect orchid in a square glass vase. The stainless steel appliances gleamed under recessed lighting, their digital displays glowing with a cold blue light. There wasn't a crumb on the counter, not a dish in the sink, not a single magnet or child's drawing on the refrigerator. It was a space devoid of history and warmth, a room where ingredients might be processed, but never where a meal would be cooked with love. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. My initial excuse to get water was now a mission. I wasn't just thirsty, I was hunting, though I wasn't sure for what. A clue, a sign, something to prove the kind nurse next door was a paranoid old woman and not a prophetess. I opened the cabinet she'd indicated. Inside, rows of identical, minimalist glasses were arranged with geometric precision. They looked like they'd never been touched. I reached for one, my hand shaking so badly I was afraid I'd drop it. My reflection was a distorted, terrified stranger, in the chrome finish of the espresso machine. "Get a grip, Frank," I told myself. "It's just a house. He's just your son." But as I closed the cabinet, my eye caught on another one next to it. A taller, narrower cabinet. Its door a seamless panel of dark, smoked glass. It was where one might keep tea, or coffee, or medicine. On a gut instinct I couldn't explain, I pulled it open. The first shelf was filled with canisters of expensive organic teas, their labels boasting of exotic blends from faraway mountains. The second shelf held vitamins and supplements in sleek, modern packaging. But it was the third shelf that made the air freeze in my lungs. Tucked behind a large box of chamomile tea, almost but not quite hidden, was a small brown glass bottle with a white dropper cap, the kind of bottle used for prescriptions. A plain white pharmacy label was affixed to it. My hands, which had built walls from 1,000-pound stones, trembled as I reached for it. The bottle was cold, its weight in my palm feeling immense. Final. I knew, even before I read the label, that this was it. This was the reason for the cold knot in my gut. My eyes focused on the typed words. The first was a name I didn't recognize, Seraphina Vance. Her maiden name. The second was the name of the drug, and it hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking all the air from my body. Digoxin. Liquid form. 0.05 milligrams per milliliter. The world tilted and went silent. The ambient hum of the house vanished. All I could hear was the frantic, roaring surge of blood in my ears. Digoxin. I knew that name. I knew it intimately. It was one of the last medications the hospice nurse had given Eleanor to manage her atrial fibrillation, to keep her failing heart from beating itself into exhaustion in her final days. It was a medicine meant to provide comfort, to ease suffering. A single drop too many, the nurse had warned, could be lethal. It could stop a heart, creating a cardiac event that was nearly indistinguishable from a natural one. Too fast, Carol had said. Too neat. My mind, numb with shock, began to race, connecting the terrible dots in a constellation of pure evil. Sarah's mother, Penelope, healthy one day, dead of a sudden heart attack the next. A new prescription, filled under Sarah's maiden name to avoid a digital trail connecting her to her mother's care. An inheritance, I presumed, that had paid for this glass coffin and the hollow life within it, and now me. The inconvenient old father-in-law, with his old-fashioned values and a life insurance policy they'd likely already researched. They hadn't invited me here to reconcile. They had invited me here to die. A wave of nausea washed over me. I leaned against the cold quartz counter, gripping it to keep from collapsing. This wasn't just a plan to murder me for money. It was a profanity. They were going to kill me with the same medicine that had been used to give my Ellie a peaceful end. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was beyond comprehension. My son, my little boy Ethan, who had cried when his pet hamster died, was complicit in this. He had hugged me at the door, knowing he was luring me to my death. The realization was a pain far sharper than any poison. I forced myself to breathe. In, out. My survival instincts, buried under a lifetime of peace and hard work, screamed to the surface. I couldn't run. I couldn't fight them. I had to play the part. I carefully placed the bottle back in its exact spot, tucking it behind the chamomile tea. My fingerprints were all over it, but that didn't matter now. I closed the cabinet door. The soft click of the magnetic latch sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I turned on the tap, the splash of running water a shocking intrusion. I filled the glass I'd taken down, my eyes staring blankly at the water swirling into the crystal. I drank half of it in long, desperate gulps, the cool liquid doing nothing to quench the fire of terror in my chest. Then I turned from the sink, holding the glass with a hand I prayed looked steady, and prepared to walk back into the lion's den, my face arranged into the mask of a happy, unsuspecting father. I walked back into the great room, the glass of water, a prop in the palm of my hand. My mind was a roaring furnace of terror, but my face, I prayed, was a calm, placid mask. Every instinct I had screamed at me to smash the glass wall, to run into the cold, dark forest, to do anything to get out of this house. But my body just kept moving, one foot in front of the other, back toward the two people who were methodically planning my death. "There you are," Sarah said, her smile unwavering. She stood up with a liquid grace. "I was just about to call you for dinner. I hope you're hungry. I made the braised short ribs Ethan told me were your favorite." My favorite. Eleanor used to make them for me on our anniversary. The thought that Sarah had co-opted this intimate detail, this piece of my history with my wife, and was now turning it into a part of their death ritual, was a special kind of violation. It made the nausea rise in my throat again. "I could eat," I said, forcing a heartiness into my voice that I did not feel. The dining table was set in an alcove off the great room. Like everything else, it was a minimalist masterpiece of dark wood and steel. 3 places were set with square, white plates, heavy silver cutlery, and a single blood-red napkin at each setting. It didn't look like a dinner table, it looked like an altar. Ethan and Sarah took their seats, and I took mine at the head of the table, placed in the seat of honor, the seat of the guest of honor, the seat of the sacrifice. "Let me pour you some wine," Sarah said, already on her feet. She moved to a sleek sideboard where a bottle of red wine was breathing in a crystal decanter. "It's a Cabernet from a small vineyard up in the valley. I think you'll really enjoy it." I watched her, my senses screaming, every cell in my body on high alert. I tracked her every movement, looking for a tell, a sign. She poured 2 glasses, one for herself and one for Ethan. Then she picked up the 3rd glass, my glass, and the decanter, her back momentarily turned to me as she faced the sideboard. "Oh, I nearly forgot the candles, she said, her voice a light, musical chime. It's not a celebration without candles. She set my glass down on the sideboard and reached into a drawer. It was the perfect moment of misdirection, a casual, domestic act. But I wasn't watching her hands at the drawer. I was watching her reflection in the dark, polished surface of a wine chiller on the counter. It was a distorted, warped reflection, but it was clear enough. As her right hand fumbled for a lighter, her left, quick as a viper's strike, darted into the pocket of her silk blouse. She pulled out a tiny vial, no bigger than her thumb. A single clear drop fell from its tip into the deep red wine in my glass. Then the vial was gone, back in her pocket. The entire act took less than 2 seconds. It was practiced. Perfect. She turned back to the table, a book of matches in her hand, and a serene smile on her face. There, that's better. She lit 2 slender white candles, their flames dancing and casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. Then she brought the 3 glasses of wine to the table, placing them carefully at each setting. My glass, filled with a beautiful ruby-red poison, sat directly in front of me. A toast, Ethan said, raising his glass. His voice was a little too loud, a little too eager. He was a bad actor, nervous on his opening night. To family, and to new beginnings. Dad, it's really good to have you here. Sarah raised her glass as well, her pale blue eyes fixed on me, waiting. This was it, the moment of execution. They watched me, their faces masks of loving expectation. I felt my own hand, as if it belonged to someone else, reach for the stem of the wine glass. My calloused, stonemason's fingers, which could set a 200-pound capstone with millimeter precision, suddenly felt clumsy, oafish. I lifted the glass, and then, with a lurch that I prayed looked like an old man's awkward spasm, I let my knuckles bang against my water glass. The wine glass tipped. For a horrifying, slow-motion second, it seemed to hang in the air before it crashed onto the pristine white plate with a sickening crack. The poisoned Cabernet exploded outwards, splashing across the table, a Rorschach blot of dark, arterial red against the stark white tablecloth. "Oh," I gasped, pulling my hand back as if I'd been burned. "Oh my God. I am so clumsy. Look at this mess. Sarah, I am so sorry." I grabbed for my napkin, dabbing uselessly at the spreading stain. My hands. They're not as steady as they used to be. I can't believe I just did that. Your beautiful table. My apology was a babble of frantic, embarrassed words, a performance I hoped was my masterpiece. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw them. Ethan's face was a mask of stunned disbelief, but Sarah's smile was gone. Her face was as cold and hard as granite. It was a look of pure, murderous rage, visible for only a second before she smoothed it away, replacing it with her hostess mask. "It's nothing, Frank, really," she said, her voice a tight, controlled wire. "Don't you worry about it for a second. It's just a tablecloth. Accidents happen." But I had seen it. I had seen the serpent behind the mask, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that they would try again. I had only just survived the first attempt. Sarah sprang into action with a terrifying cold efficiency. "It's no problem at all," she repeated, her voice a little too bright. She whisked away my plate and the broken glass, returning moments later with a fresh place setting and a damp cloth. As she wiped down the dark wood, her movements were sharp and precise, her knuckles white. She was scrubbing away the evidence of her failure. Ethan, flustered and useless, just sat there, trying to fill the silence with nervous chatter about the stock market. I wasn't listening. I was watching Sarah's hands, my mind calculating. They had failed once. They would not be so careless again. She served the meal. The braised short ribs, the dish Eleanor used to make, smelled incredible. The aroma filled the sterile dining alcove, a ghost of a happy memory in this house of horrors. But as Sarah placed the plate in front of me, all I could see was a slab of meat, laced with poison. My stomach churned. "Go on, Dad, dig in," Ethan urged, already cutting into his own portion. "Sarah's an amazing cook." I picked up my fork. It felt as heavy as a lead pipe. I had to eat. Not eating would be an admission of suspicion, an open declaration of war. I cut a small piece of meat. I put it in my mouth. It was tender, delicious, and it tasted like ashes. I chewed slowly, deliberately, my throat constricting with each swallow. I watched them. They ate normally, their conversation stilted, circling back to safe, impersonal topics: real estate, the weather, the merits of different luxury car brands. It was the most agonizing meal of my life. I was a condemned man eating his last meal, sitting across the table from my executioners, pretending to enjoy their company. I moved the food around my plate, taking small bites, drinking my water, trying to look like a man enjoying a family dinner. After what felt like an eternity, the main course was over. I had managed to eat maybe a third of my portion, pushing the rest around enough to make it look like I was full. My mind was screaming, searching for an escape route, a way out of this waking nightmare. "That was wonderful, Sarah." "Thank you," I said, placing my napkin on the table. "If you'll excuse me, it's been a long few days of driving. I think I should turn in early. This was my chance." I started to push my chair back. "Oh, but you can't leave yet," Ethan said, his voice jumping an octave too high. He shot a quick, nervous glance at Sarah. "You haven't had dessert. And coffee." "Dad, you have to try the coffee Sarah found. It's this special single-origin decaf from Guatemala. It's incredible. It helps you sleep like a baby." Sleep like a baby. The phrase hung in the air, a thinly veiled threat. Sarah was already rising from her chair, her hostess' smile plastered back on her face. "Ethan's right. It's no trouble at all. I can have it ready in just a moment." This was it. Plan B. They were more insistent now. Desperate. Their window of opportunity was closing. They couldn't let me just go to my room. They needed to finish the job. The walls of the glass house felt like they were shrinking, the air growing thin. I was cornered. "No, really, I couldn't," I started to say. "We insist," Sarah said, her voice no longer soft but edged with steel. She was already walking toward the gleaming espresso machine in the kitchen. My mind raced, scrambling for an excuse, a lie, anything. My gaze fell on the rich, dark gravy still pooled on my plate. The rich food. My age. It was my only way out. As Sarah's back was turned, I let my fork clatter to my plate. I made a low groaning sound and brought my hand to my chest, clutching the front of my flannel shirt. "Dad? What's wrong?" Ethan's voice was filled with alarm. I let my head hang, my breathing becoming shallow and ragged. Oh, my stomach," I gasped, my voice a pained whisper. I looked up, making sure my face was pale, my eyes wide with what I hoped looked like genuine distress. "It must have been the long drive, and this food is so rich. I'm not used to it. It's a terrible indigestion, a sharp pain, right here." I pressed my knuckles just below my breastbone. For a terrifying second, I saw a flicker of something in their eyes. It wasn't concern, it was a flash of triumphant excitement. They thought it was happening. They thought their poison from the wine, perhaps a delayed action formula, was finally working. I just need to lie down," I wheezed, pushing myself up from the table, using the furniture for support, playing the part of a frail, sick old man. "The coffee? I couldn't possibly. I just need to get to my room, please." Before they could object, before they could offer a remedy or insist I stay, I turned and began to stumble out of the dining alcove, my gait unsteady. Every step was a monumental effort of will, a performance for the two-person audience I was leaving behind. I didn't look back, but I could feel their eyes on me, their frustration and confusion radiating like heat. I had bought myself a few precious minutes. Now I had to use them to save my own life. I didn't dare look back. I kept one hand pressed to my chest, my shoulders hunched, and shuffled down the long, gallery-like hallway. The polished concrete was cold and hard beneath my thin socks. On the walls, the abstract art, the angry slashes of color and chaotic shapes seemed to mock my agony. Each step was a performance. I could feel their eyes on my back, watching, assessing. Were they buying it, or were they just letting me walk to my cage before they decided on a new, more direct approach? The guest suite was at the far end of the hall. Ethan pushed the door open for me before I reached it. "It's right in here, Dad. The bed is comfortable. Just try to rest." His voice was laced with a counterfeit concern that made my skin crawl. The room was as cold and impersonal as the rest of the house. It was dominated by a low platform bed that looked like a stone slab and a single severe-looking chair. The entire far wall was a sheet of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a terrifyingly exposed view of the black, brooding forest. There were no curtains. I felt like a specimen in a jar. "Thank you, son," I mumbled, not meeting his eyes. I stumbled into the room, and as soon as he pulled the door closed, I lunged for it, my feigned illness forgotten. My trembling fingers found the lock, a small, sleek button on the handle. I pressed it. The soft, electronic snick of the deadbolt sliding into place was the loudest, most beautiful sound I had ever heard. For the first time in hours, there was a physical barrier between me and them. It was a temporary reprieve, and I knew I had to use every second of it. My eyes darted around the room, looking for a place to hide. The attached bathroom was the only option. It was another sterile masterpiece of marble and glass. I slipped inside, closed the heavy door, and flicked that lock too. 2 locked doors. It still didn't feel like enough. I sank to the floor, my back against the cool, smooth marble of the wall, and pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely unlock the screen. My thumb jabbed at the screen, finally hitting the green phone icon. I dialed the 3 numbers I never thought I'd have to use in my life. 911. I pressed the phone hard against my ear, my breath held tight in my chest. 911. What is the address of your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was a woman's, calm and professional, an anchor of sanity in my world of madness. I took a ragged breath and whispered, my voice cracking. My name is Frank Miller. I'm at my son's house. I read the address off a piece of junk mail I'd seen on the entryway table, my mind having latched onto it as a crucial piece of data. The summit at Cedar Ridge. Okay, sir. Can you tell me what's happening? They're trying to kill me, I whispered, the words sounding insane even to my own ears. My son, Ethan Miller, and his wife, Serafina, they're trying to poison me. Sir, I need you to stay on the line. Are you in immediate danger? Yes, they just tried twice. With wine, and then coffee. I found the poison. It's in the kitchen. I described the digoxin bottle, my voice a frantic, hushed torrent of words. His wife's mother. She died here a few months ago. A heart attack. The neighbor, she's a nurse, she warned me. Just then, a soft knock came at the bedroom door, making me jump so violently I almost dropped the phone. Dad? It was Ethan's voice, muffled through the 2 doors. Are you okay in there? Can I get you a glass of water, maybe an aspirin? My blood ran cold. I pressed my hand over the phone's microphone, my eyes screwed shut. I didn't breathe. He was testing the lock, checking on his prey. Dad, are you there? I stayed completely silent, praying he would think I had collapsed or fallen asleep. After a long, agonizing moment, I heard his footsteps recede down the hall. Sir, are you still there? The dispatcher's voice crackled in my ear. Yes, I breathed, my whole body trembling. He was just at the door. Okay, Frank, she said, her tone both soothing and urgent. Officers are on their way. They are turning into the development right now. We have the gate code from the system. Can you stay in that bathroom? I think so. I've locked the doors. Good. Don't hang up. Just stay on the line with me. Help is just a few minutes away. A few minutes. On eternity. I stayed crouched on the cold floor, the phone pressed to my ear like a holy relic. I listened to the silence of the line on the other end, a silence that meant help was coming. And I listened to the silence of the house, a silence that meant the monsters were just on the other side of the door, waiting. I stayed crouched on the cold marble floor, the phone a lifeline to a world where reason still existed. The dispatcher's voice was a calm, steady presence in my ear, a single thread of sanity to cling to. They're at the gate, Frank. Stay where you are. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside the giant window, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. Then I saw it. A flicker of red and blue, ghostly and silent, flashing through the dark woods. The colors washed over the sterile white walls of the bathroom, a silent, strobing announcement that the world was about to break in. A moment later, the sound came. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway, not the whisper of an electric motor, but the heavy, purposeful sound of police cruisers. Car doors slammed shut, a sound so loud in the oppressive quiet of the neighborhood that it felt like a gunshot. I heard Sarah's voice from the living room, sharp and annoyed. What in the world is that? The melodic doorbell chimed, quickly followed by a heavy, authoritative knock that rattled the massive glass door on its pivots. LAPD, a man's voice boomed, though I knew we were a world away from LA. It was a generic, powerful announcement. Sheriff's Department, open the door. What is going on? I heard Ethan stammer. His voice was thin, panicked. This was my moment. The dispatcher in my ear said, "Sir, the officers are at the door. You can come out now if you feel safe." "I'm coming," I whispered into the phone and ended the call. I pushed myself up, my legs stiff and unsteady. I unlocked the bathroom door, then the bedroom door. The long, dark hallway stretched before me. I was no longer a frail, sick old man. I walked with a steady, deliberate pace, my heart a heavy, solid drum in my chest. As I approached the great room, I could hear Ethan's voice, high and frantic, trying to control the situation. "Officer, there must be some kind of mistake. My wife and I were just having a quiet dinner with my father." I stepped into the foyer. Two uniformed sheriff's deputies filled the doorway, their presence immense and reassuring. Ethan and Sarah stood before them, their faces pale in the flashing emergency lights that now flooded the entire house. The glass walls that were meant to display their perfect life now reflected their complete and utter ruin. Sarah's face was a mask of cold, indignant fury. Ethan just looked like a terrified child. He saw me, and his eyes widened in horror and disbelief. The lead officer, a tall man with a calm, no-nonsense face, looked from them to me. "We received a 911 call reporting an attempted poisoning at this address." "Officers," I said, my voice clear and strong, resonating in the silent, cavernous room. "I'm Frank Miller. I'm the one who called." The color drained from Ethan's face. Sarah's jaw tightened, her perfect mask of civility finally cracking to reveal the cold, hard granite beneath. "Dad?" Ethan choked out the word. "What are you talking about? You're confused. You were sick." "I was never sick, son," I said, my voice level, devoid of the emotion that was raging inside me. "I was pretending, because I knew you were trying to murder me." I turned to the officers. In the kitchen, in a cabinet next to the sink, behind the chamomile tea, you will find a bottle of liquid digoxin prescribed to a Seraphina Vance. On the dining room table, there's a tablecloth stained with the wine she poisoned, and on the kitchen counter, there's a cup of coffee she was about to give me. One deputy headed for the kitchen, while the other kept his eyes fixed on Ethan and Sarah. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the police radio. A moment later, the deputy returned from the kitchen, holding the small brown bottle in a gloved hand. It's exactly where he said it was. That's when Ethan broke. A pathetic, whimpering sound escaped his lips. "It was her idea," he sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at his wife. "Sarah. She said it would be easy. She said her mother. He dissolved into incoherent blubbering. Sarah did not flinch. She didn't even look at her husband. She just stared at me, her pale blue eyes filled with a hatred so pure and cold it was terrifying. She had lost, and she knew it. There were no more moves to make. "You're both under arrest for attempted murder," the lead officer said, pulling out handcuffs. As they cuffed my son, he looked at me, his face a mess of tears and desperation. "Dad, please," he begged. "Tell them it's all a misunderstanding." I looked at the weeping stranger in front of me, the last embers of my fatherly love dying out, leaving nothing but cold ash. "The misunderstanding was all mine, son," I said, my voice finally breaking. "I misunderstood who you had become." They led them away, Ethan sobbing, Sarah silent and radiating contempt. I stood alone in the center of the great room as they were placed in separate patrol cars. The flashing lights painted the walls in strobing blues and reds, a chaotic, silent disco in the house of shattered glass. I had survived, but I had lost my son forever. The hours after they were taken away were a blur of flashing lights, methodical police work, and the quiet, respectful questions of a detective who looked at me with a profound, weary pity in his eyes. I answered everything, my voice a monotone, recounting the story over and over until the words lost all meaning. Carol, the kind nurse from next door, brought me a blanket and a hot cup of tea that I didn't drink, her presence a silent, comforting vigil in the chaos. The glass house had become a crime scene, its sterile surfaces now smudged with fingerprint dust, its hollow silence filled with the crackle of radios. I did not spend the night there. The detectives arranged for me to stay in a small, anonymous hotel, a place with beige walls and no ghosts. The legal process that followed was swift and clinical. The evidence was overwhelming. The digoxin, Sarah's hidden prescription, The damning financial records that showed a massive insurance payout after her mother's heart attack, and of course, my testimony and Carol's. The media called it the Glass House plot, a lurid tale for the evening news. I ignored it all. I stayed in Washington just long enough to give my deposition, my words recorded and transcribed into a neat, soulless document. They were both sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Ethan, I was told, had wept through the entire trial. Sarah had remained silent, her expression unreadable to the very end. They offered me the chance to give a victim's impact statement at the sentencing. I declined. There was nothing left to say. The drive back to Pennsylvania was the longest journey of my life. The country that had seemed so vast and full of possibility on the way out now felt empty, a gray ribbon of highway stretching through a world that had lost some of its color. I didn't stop at diners or chat with truck drivers. I just drove, the old Ford, a faithful, rumbling cocoon, carrying me back to the only place I had left. When I finally pulled into my gravel driveway, the familiar sight of my small stone house felt like the first true breath I'd taken in weeks. It was solid. It was real. It was honest. The garden was slightly overgrown, but it was still there, waiting for me. A few days later, I took the small walnut box, the one I had so carefully carried across the country as a peace offering, and I walked down to the creek behind the house. It was the same spot where I'd taught Ethan to skip stones, the same spot where the sunlight had once danced on the water, full of a promise that now felt like a cruel joke. The memory was no longer warm. It was a scar. I stood at the water's edge, holding the box, its smooth surface a testament to a love that no longer had a place to live. It was a relic of a boy who didn't exist anymore, perhaps who had never existed at all outside of a father's hopeful heart. With a final gentle push, I set it in the current. It bobbed for a moment, then began to drift, turning slowly in the clear, cool water. It floated downstream, under the dappled shade of the oaks, growing smaller and smaller until it rounded a bend and was gone forever. I didn't cry. The time for tears was over. It was simply an act of letting go. The next morning, I went out to my workshop. The air smelled of stone dust and motor oil. My tools were all there, hanging in their proper places, patient and waiting. I ran my hand over a half-finished piece of slate, its surface cool and textured. My hands, which had trembled with fear in that house of glass, were steady now. I picked up a hammer and a chisel. There was a section of the garden wall near the old rose bushes that had been crumbling, a project I'd been putting off. I selected a good, solid piece of fieldstone, its weight familiar and reassuring in my grasp, and I began to work. The clean, sharp clink of steel on stone was the only sound, a rhythm of purpose and permanence, a quiet rebuilding of a life. The wall would be strong. It would stand for 100 years, and it was enough.